Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So Tenet has been officially out for 2 weeks, and now that I've explained it and reviewed it, I figured it would be a good time to make a video exploring where Tenet ranks among Christopher Nolan's filmography. Now, as I mentioned in my review video, Christopher Nolan is my favorite film director. His films captured my attention at an early age, and I consider him to be one of the reasons why I got so interested in films. Although there are filmmakers who I consider to be better, Nolan's films are definitely the ones for which I get the most hyped and excited for. He's one of the very few directors today who have the resources as well as the creative freedom to create truly original and ambitious stories that transport you into these unique worlds full of audiovisual spectacle that cinemas are made for. Although I've seen all of his films multiple times before, revisiting them now for this video after 5 or 6 years of not seeing them really gave me a different perspective on some of them, and whenever I'm putting together a list like this where I rank films, there's always a struggle between the objective quality of a film and my personal subjective preference. But since this is my list, I'm going to try and sort of mix both into my decision, so it's not purely objective, but it's also not just purely subjective, and I'll talk about it more during the video. So at number 11, Following. This film is a great example that you don't need a giant budget to make a great and compelling story. Following only had a $6,000 budget, and because of this, it's more of a student film that's really long than a proper feature film, so I don't think it's really fair to compare it to other Nolan films, but it's definitely a film that if you're a fan of Nolan, you should check out, as it includes all of his filmmaking trademarks like an unconventional narrative structure, intercutting between multiple timelines, as well as an obsessed protagonist plays in this maze of a story, and it's a film that definitely fulfills its limited potential. At number 10, The Dark Knight Rises. So this is a film I actually really loved when it first came out, and I went to see it in the cinema like 3 or 4 times, and then I've seen it like 2 or 3 times at home since then, and I must say that with every rewatch this film just gets worse and worse and worse. This might be the easiest decision I've made on this list. This was sort of a unanimous pick for me that this is Nolan's worst film, if I don't count Following. And although I like the way it thematically wraps up the Dark Knight trilogy, and it does have some great moments in it, like the sequence where Bane takes over Gotham and hears that Blackgate prison speech, or when Bruce climbs out of the pit, the problem with this film is that it just doesn't feel like a Batman film. Most of it is shot during the day, and Gotham looks, well, it doesn't look like Gotham at all. It's basically New York City, and as a result, Rises just doesn't have the comic book feel to it because it has no atmosphere. It also features what is probably the cringiest dialogue out of any Nolan film. It's full of these key plot points that feel really forced and lines that are cheesy, and I don't know, it feels like this was a really ambitious film that tried to juggle a lot of big ideas, but in the end its reach exceeded its grasp basically, and every time I watch it I notice more and more things that bother me about the film, and so yeah, this is a clear number 10 for me. At number 9, Insomnia. So this is where the list starts to get tough, because I had no problems with Insomnia as a film. It's a small film that completely fulfills its potential as a great crime thriller. It's also the most character-driven film that Nolan ever made, which might be because it's a remake and not based off an original script like all his other films. It has Al Pacino in a great central performance. He plays this tortured, accomplished detective whose moral dilemma basically drives the entire story, and then there's Hilary Swank playing a rookie detective that's idealistic and naive, and they're both basically in this mentor-student relationship at the exact opposite ends of their careers. And then there's Robin Williams, who's amazing in this unusual role, and he's one of my all-time favorites. I love the ending of this film, where basically the moral conflict gets passed from one character to the other, and it makes Insomnia into something more than just a good detective story. It's a thought-provoking one as well. At number 8, Tenet. I went over this film in a lot more detail in my recent reviews, so in case you're interested in that, make sure to check it out. But to basically sum it all up, this is a film I enjoyed. It's epic, it's entertaining, and it's made for the cinema experience. But above all, it's just really original, and films like Tenet are incredibly rare in today's Hollywood. So just for that, the film deserves a lot of recognition. Obviously, it's really well technically crafted, although I would say that its biggest action sequences aren't on par with other Nolan masterpieces, like the twisting corridor in Inception or the docking scene in Interstellar. It's a film that really utilizes all of Nolan's strengths as a filmmaker, but it really also highlights all of his shortcomings. It does lack emotional depth, and this was my biggest issue with the film, because the characters just feel really two-dimensional. I know the purpose of the film isn't to have these really deep characters, and also the ending of the film is just really weak. It might be the weakest ending out of any Nolan film. At number 7, Batman Begins. So if this was a purely subjective list, I would definitely rate this film at least in the top 5. Batman Begins is a film that I've really grown to love over the years, and it's a film that I feel is sort of a forgotten gem at this point. Not many people talk about it anymore, even though it's arguably the best origin story for a comic book character. It certainly had a huge influence on other comic book films in the future, and it's also a film like, remember what I said about Dark Knight Rises having these false notes where I'm just bothered by a lot of the dialogue or what the characters do? Batman Begins is such a good film at establishing great characters with realistic motivations, and all these fantastic actors like Michael Caine playing Alfred and Morgan Freeman playing Lucius Fox. And then of course my absolute favorite is Liam Neeson as the villain, who's so good. Like, the scenes between Ra's al Ghul and Bruce Wayne are my absolute favorite in the film, especially the entire first third of the film where we see the training sequences, and then we see Bruce traveling back to Gotham, and the final act is the only part where I have some issues with, the CGI didn't age that well and the fight scenes aren't that well choreographed. But apart from that, Batman Begins is a film that has really grown on me over the years, and I feel like it's a masterclass on how to successfully launch a comic book character. At number 6, The Prestige. So this is the Nolan film that actually has the lowest rating out of top critics on Rotten Tomatoes, only 6.2 out of 10, which is kind of crazy because it's really well paced, it's well crafted, the cinematography is amazing. Then you have Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale in the lead roles as these two magicians obsessed with one-upping each other. Then there's this supporting cast that features Michael Caine, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, and David Bowie in an amazing role of Nikola Tesla. Just overall a brilliant cast, and I think the main reason the critics didn't like this film is actually because it gets much better with repeated viewings. You don't really catch all the nuance that's hidden in this film if you only see it once, especially with the Christian Bale character. And one of the most satisfying things about this film is actually how neatly it manages to tie up all the loose ends and the character arcs at the end, and delivers just one of the best movie endings I've ever seen. At number 5, Memento. Memento is one of the films that really inspired me as a kid. It was a film unlike anything else I've seen before, and it really changed my outlook on films and what was really possible. It was one of the very first films that actually made me research the person who directed it. I was really interested in the mind of someone who could actually come up with a film like this. Memento is just one of those rare films that every single film lover enjoys and loves. It has a universal appeal because it's original and flawlessly executed at the same time. Everything fits together perfectly like a puzzle piece, and it's definitely one of the films that really defines Nolan as a filmmaker. And the only reason why I'm not ranking it higher than the other films on this list is because I don't have the need to revisit the film as much. I've seen it 3 or 4 times, I feel like I've figured it out, and there's not really a scene or a moment in the film that I just like replaying over and over, which is the case in all the other films ahead of Memento on this list. At number 4, Dunkirk. So Dunkirk is the only Nolan film that I've only seen once in the cinema, mainly because it was actually kind of disappointing for me when I first saw it. I was expecting almost like this Schindler's List moment for Nolan. I felt like his career reached a point similar to Steven Spielberg before he made Schindler's List. Like, he was known for these blockbusters and sci-fi films, and then he decided to make a serious project dedicated to his people. To an extent, Nolan did achieve this, but I didn't really recognize it the first time I saw the film. And over time, the film just grew on me and I slowly fell in love with it, especially over the last 6 months. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, and each time I just get more and more emotional about the film. It even makes me feel patriotic, even though I'm not from the UK. It just makes me feel really proud to be a human being, and I've lived in the UK for 3 years, so I feel like I have a connection with its people, maybe more than someone who hasn't lived there. Especially this moment where all the boats come in to save the soldiers, and Kenneth Branagh's character just asks them like, where are you from? And they answer, you know, I'm from this town and I'm from this town. And it's just such a beautiful human moment. And then from the technical standpoint, Dunkirk is probably the most flawless film that Nolan has ever made. The way he uses music and sound design as well as the narrative structure to basically build this suspenseful film, even though it's not really action oriented, it's actually more of an experimental film that is available to the mainstream audience only because of Nolan's skill as a director that's in full command of the filmmaking craft. At number 3, Interstellar. This film came out at a perfect time for me. I remember I was in London studying film, and I remember that when the trailers and all the marketing for this film were coming out, I was super into Cosmos by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I was really excited that my favorite film director is going to make a space movie, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to deal with all this science about black holes, and it had Matthew McConaughey in the lead role, and it was this era of the McConaissance where he won the Oscar, and he had this amazing role in True Detective and all these other films. And yeah, I mean, I remember watching this film in the cinema and liking it more and more each time I went to see it. I think I saw it around 5 times. And one thing that's really interesting about Interstellar is just how wide its generational reach goes. I saw this film with my classmates and my friends. I saw this film with my parents. I even took my 90-year-old grandma to see this film, and she liked it. And I think the main reason that this film has such a wide appeal is because this is definitely Nolan's most emotionally resonant film. And I think a lot of it is due to the writing and also acting by Matthew McConaughey. But I feel like the biggest contributing factor to this is actually Hans Zimmer's absolutely beautiful score. It's one of the most beautiful scores ever made, and it just fits perfectly. And whenever it hits in these scenes, like when there's the 20 years of messages being replayed or the stay sequence at the end of the film, man, I mean, I always get so emotional during this film. I always get tears in my eyes, and of course the visual spectacle of the film is just absolutely unique. And then the final thing I really love about this film is that how it promotes science and scientific thinking, and the fact that this film is undoubtedly going to inspire a lot of young people and a lot of kids to become scientists, and that's just beautiful. That's what art is for, in my opinion. At number 2, Inception. So I'm always having this internal debate about what film should be number 2 and number 3 between Inception and Interstellar. Both are masterpieces in my opinion. Interstellar is more of a flawed masterpiece that I have a bigger emotional connection to, while Inception is a masterpiece in which I just can't help it but admire the filmmaking at work and the originality and uniqueness of this film. So if I were to sum it up, if I could only see one film for the remainder of my life, I would choose Interstellar. But if I were to choose one film for other people to see and for other filmmakers to see, I would pick Inception. I think it's a more important film for the film industry, and it's just one of those films, like I mentioned with Memento, that's just a part of the pop culture. Inception is basically Memento on steroids. It's a film overflowing with ideas and originality that is really pushing the boundaries of what a film could be and just how smart a summer blockbuster could get. And it just gets everything right. It has a great cast with the biggest star of its generation in the lead role. It has a really original screenplay. It has amazing cinematography for which it won the Oscar. It has multiple locations that are all visually distinctive from each other. It has a great Hans Zimmer score, and it has one of the best ambiguous endings in cinema history. At number 1, The Dark Knight. Man, this film is just so good. This is beyond masterpiece. This is just the masterpiece of masterpieces, in my opinion. I don't see how any other Chris Nolan film can be number one. I've seen The Dark Knight like 20 times at this point, and each time I'm watching it, I'm trying to find things that just don't work. I'm trying to find excuses why this isn't Nolan's best film, why a comic book film isn't as great as Inception or Interstellar or his other films. But I just can't. This film is so flawless from the beginning sequence that introduces the Joker, that is just perfect. The pacing in the film is amazing. There is not a single dull moment. It has one of the best acting performances in Heath Ledger's Joker. The dialogue is clever and on point and funny, and Nolan builds on all these characters that he established in The Batman Begins, and this gives the film greater emotional depth. It combines the technical brilliance of a film like Inception with the emotional punch of a film like Interstellar, and then it has all this amazing visual imagery like the truck flipping over, or the Joker sticking his head out from the police car, or Batman mourning the loss of Rachel. The only thing that bothers me a bit is the casting of Rachel. I think Maggie Gyllenhaal doesn't fit the role as well as Katie Holmes did, and then I think that Harvey Dent's makeup was a bit overblown as Two-Face. I don't think it fits in with the realistic vibe of the film. But apart from these two tiny little things, this is a perfect film. This is just a transcendent masterpiece, and you can see that even watching it today, after 12 years of other comic book films trying to capture its success, nothing compares to The Dark Knight. Nothing has topped it. This is the greatest comic book film ever made. Nolan managed to take this comic book genre, which was regarded as an inferior film genre, and he moved it into deeper waters and expanded on the deep themes that define these characters. And that's why The Dark Knight is not only my favorite Nolan film, but it's one of my favorite films of all time. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what your list would be in the comment section. I'm actually really interested to see how different my taste in Nolan films is from you guys. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and tune in for another one soon.